This is one of nature's most mechanical designs. An insect with a prehensile face, snatching prey at speeds our eyes can barely perceive. Sharp pincers or big scoopers grab the prey and bring it back to the mouth. It all happens in just milliseconds, and sort of looks like it's from a horror movie. But this is not an alien, it's a dragonfly nymph. Dragonflies are many people's absolute favorite insect because of their near-perfect hunting skill in the skies. But their juvenile form is almost just as formidable underwater. Plus, they spend about 90% of their life in this nymph stage. These juvenile forms do not get enough credit, because their weapon is not just fast, it is a mind-blowingly mechanical apparatus for a living creature. And it allows dragonfly nymphs to dominate freshwater habitats as top predators. This is one of those insects that I'm very glad is tiny. But surprisingly, their other end is extremely mechanical too. So much so that for a long time, researchers considered it to be unnecessarily complicated. A complicated butthole? Why? We know that they use a hydraulic system for jet propulsion and can move incredibly fast. And we know that they also respirate through this opening. But the reason the butthole valve is so heavily engineered is not what I ever would have guessed. And on top of all of this, the metamorphosis from nymph to dragonfly is like nothing else I have ever seen. It sort of broke my brain. I started writing this video thinking this would be an easy and quick one, but turns out, nope, we're in for a long-ass video about an obscure little insect. So how does their mechanical and hydraulic system work? How do they use it to move around, breathe, and snatch prey? Why is their butthole so complex? And what about their metamorphosis is so deeply unsettling? The life of a dragonfly begins in its oval-shaped egg, in or near fresh water, since dragonflies are obligately aquatic during their early life stages. Sometimes the eggs can even be quite dazzling. Inside the egg, the embryo develops into a tiny larva over the course of several days to several weeks. When ready to hatch, the larva breaks through the egg membrane as a prolarva, a tiny tadpole-like creature. Amazingly, once it emerges from the egg, it starts its first molt immediately, sometimes within seconds, becoming the dangerous predator that is a dragonfly nymph. Now, this six-legged nymph truly begins its life underwater. There are as many as 7,000 species of dragonfly in the world. So there are of course as many different types of nymphs that are all a bit different. But all dragonfly nymphs have large compound eyes that give them excellent vision underwater, along with short, bristle-like antennae for tactile sensing. Developing wing pads are also visible, becoming more prominent as the nymph grows. And of course, there's the extendable prehensile labium, often called the mask. On the thorax, dragonfly nymphs have 3 pairs of segmented legs used for clinging, crawling, or burrowing, depending on their lifestyle. Nymphs will molt many times throughout their life, up to 15 times depending on the species. Each molt allows the nymph to grow and get closer to its adult form. This is a huge number compared to other insects, who often molt just 3 to 4 times before becoming their adult form. The high number for dragonfly nymphs is in part due to their long life. Their nymph stage can last months to several years. Nymphs can be categorized into 4 main types based on how they live and move in their aquatic environment. First, there are the claspers, those with slender bodies with long legs that allow them to grasp plant stems. There's the sprawlers, those with flattened bodies who hang out on the surface of the sediment. There's the hiders, those with compact and camouflaged bodies that live among leaf litter. And finally, there's the burrowers, those with cylindrical bodies that live underneath the sediment. You'll notice that the burrowers have this extra long tubular abdominal segment, scientifically called tube butts. These tube butts act like a snorkel, but instead of sticking out from the water into the air, they stick out from the mud into the water. And they do this because the rectal gills within the tube butts need to access the water for breathing. All dragonfly nymphs have rectal gills like this. They draw fresh oxygenated water in and out in a process called rectal ventilation, aka butt breathing. And amazingly, if the conditions become hypoxic, meaning there's not enough oxygen dissolved in the water, the dragonfly nymphs will stick their anal pyramid above the water's surface and breathe atmospheric oxygen. This is such an underrated superpower. Their butts are full of evolutionary surprises like this, because the same system that pulls water in and out for respiration allows the nymphs to use jet propulsion for rapid escape. They're the only insect known to do this. It works like this. Water is drawn into the rectum the same way as for breathing. Then the anus is sealed. Then, to generate thrust, powerful abdominal muscles contract around the rectal chamber, building up pressure. When the anal valves open, the pressurized water is expelled rapidly, propelling the nymph forward by jet action. This sounds simple enough, but some scientists were perplexed at how complicated the valves seem to be.
What we were really amazed by was the shape of their chamber, and we were really mesmerized by the way they control the most external valve.
This is Chris Rowe, assistant professor at Cornell University in the Department of Biological and Environmental Engineering.
And the reason was not just that it was readily visible, its action, but that initially it felt like it was unnecessarily complicated. Because the valve, the more common one might be the ones that are more sphincter-like, where you have a continuous variation like that. But instead, these had maybe not quite a leaflet, but like this lobes that actually block third of the valve.
What Chris is describing is called a tri-leaflet anal valve. It looks kind of similar to the valves that we have in our hearts.
When we first looked at it, we thought, that's interesting. That seems overly complicated, and maybe there's a reason for that.
So Chris and his team began to investigate. What could this complicated valve be used for? When they started to look closely, the first thing they noticed completely took them by surprise.
When we finally got the camera set up just right, we saw that for exhalation and inhalation, they independently control these leaflets.
This allows the nymph to control the size and the symmetry of the valve opening. But what does this asymmetry do to the jet coming out?
One of the main effects that we saw was that by creating an asymmetry, so the bottom two are still covered, only lift up the top, we started to see that actually that deflects the jet and controls the direction of the jet, and we called it jet vectoring.
So does it affect their trajectory?
Funny enough, for changing direction, they don't use this jet vectoring. At least we haven't seen that.
It turns out when they want to change direction, they just bend their body to direct the jet, while leaving the valve completely open. What the valve asymmetry is actually for is something else, and it's not exactly intuitive. It's only when the nymphs are not moving and only breathing that they deflect the jet.
And we wanted to understand, why would they want to do that?
To find out, Chris and his team visualized the flow of fluid around the valve.
And what was really interesting is that whenever there is a jet that goes into otherwise steady water, it actually accelerates the flow around the jet towards the jet. It creates a little bit of a suction in the surrounding fluid. And that's usually 90 degrees to the direction of the jet. So if the jet is going this way, you can imagine from the top, bottom, and around it, fluid is accelerated towards that jet.
This is called entrainment, the process by which a turbulent or high-velocity flow draws in surrounding fluid or particles into its own stream.
Now, if you deflect the jet, then what you're doing to the surrounding fluid is in the bottom, as the jet's coming up, fluid is coming this way towards the jet. And what we saw was that when they need to inhale the water, what they do is open the bottom two leaflet and welcomes that jet into their chamber. So it's very interesting to think that when they're exhaling, they're already starting to inhale and accelerate the water around it.
Chris thinks that perhaps there is an energetic advantage, or maybe it provides them with more fresh water, since it could prevent them from breathing in water that they've already exhaled, which would have a lot more CO2. This is fascinating in its own right, but Chris and his team think this research could have far-ranging implications. And it comes back to that similarity these valves have with human heart valves.
This looks like our heart valve. Many of our heart valve, 3 of them, in fact, has a tri-leaflet valves, but they're not controlled. They just open and close, open and close.
And until now, prosthetic heart valves have been one size fits all. They were all just the same with a symmetrical opening. But this can become a problem.
That jet impinging on the wall of a heart, on the blood vessels, can actually cause different diseases. In fact, if it doesn't hit at certain speed, then that can also be a problem.
If the blood comes out too forcefully, it can be abrasive to the walls of the blood vessels, or even cause blood clots. Normally, to deal with this, heart valve patients have to be put on blood thinners for the rest of their lives. But now there could be a different approach.
What if we can actually make a heart valve like dragonfly larva? So when people need a replacement valve surgery, what if we are able to provide this sort of independent control of the leaflet that tailors to each patient?
These prosthetic valves could direct jets in specific directions that mimic natural blood flow and reduce these complications. That's so cool to think that people will have a piece of dragonfly in their heart.
Yeah.
Or dragonfly butthole, I guess.
Yeah.
This anal jet engine is truly incredible. But at the other end of their body is a tool so specialized it almost betrays what we know about evolution entirely. A weapon so mechanical that it is one of the most impressive examples of evolution I've ever come across. In most insects, the labium is a simple apparatus. It serves as a protective sheath for delicate feeding structures and helps manipulate food, basically like a lower lip. In most insects, the mandibles are the scary part, the part that does the biting and the chewing. But the labium of a dragonfly nymph is much more specialized to a truly insane degree. Their labium is ejectable. It consists of 4 movable elements: the postmentum, the prementum, and 2 labial palps. These palps are sometimes spoon-shaped and sometimes pincer-shaped. Some of the palps can be attached to mentums that are super long, and some are quite short. At rest, they fold up and sometimes interlock, creating what is called the mask. What's with the different shapes? The spoon-shaped grabbers allow the nymphs to grab at a large area, allowing them to catch prey that is relatively small compared to their body size. When you think about it, catching a tiny flea with a precise pincer would be hard. The spoons also have long setae that form a lattice locking the prey in the labium. And conversely, the pincer-type palps are good for catching larger prey. Certain nymphs can catch and eat prey that is their own size or even larger, including small fish and tadpoles. The nymphs with the long mentums have the obvious advantage of a longer reach. And the ones with the short mentums, those can strike much faster and more efficiently. To catch their prey, nymphs often lie in wait, camouflaged on the bottom of a stream or pond, waiting to ambush prey as it passes by. Once it locks onto its target, the labial mask spreads apart and catapults forward. And when I say catapult, I literally mean catapult, because their mouthparts store and then release energy just like catapults do. There are 2 catapults, the premental catapult and the postmental catapult. The postmental catapult is loaded when one muscle contracts and strains a T-rod. The premental catapult is loaded when another muscle contracts and strains the premental sclerite, which acts like a spring, storing elastic energy until it's released during the strike. Once the nymph is ready to strike, the mouthparts open to prepare for grasping. Then another muscle contracts and unfolds the articulatory plate, which pushes the postmental knob over the premental groove. This triggers the rapid release of the premental catapult. At the same time, the T-rod releases and propels the postmentum forward. All of this is pretty complicated, and that was even the simplified version. And all of this happens in the blink of an eye, between 15 and 40 milliseconds, rivaling some of the fastest movements in the animal kingdom. This strike allows the nymph to capture prey at lightning speed without moving its body, perfect for allowing it to ambush fast-moving prey. And after firing, the labium quickly folds back under the head, relocks, and can be reloaded rapidly, meaning the nymph can attempt multiple strikes in quick succession. It's so cool that researchers developed a bio-inspired robotic model resembling the morphology of this mouth part. And amazingly, once the palps have snatched the prey, they then help manipulate the food by rotating it or pinning it, almost like hands delivering the food into the chewing mouth parts. This means that the palps don't move only in the forward dimension. They can rotate and spin with great dexterity. And there's one more thing that these nymphs do that brings their mechanical mouthpart and their jet propulsion together. Scientists noticed that during prey capture, certain larvae eject a water jet from their rectal chamber, farting and punching at the same time. What could this be about? A hint is revealed by looking at a nymph who doesn't eject a jet stream during capture. It bounces forcefully backwards, a distinct recoil. The jet propulsion during strike, then, is probably a mechanism to prevent this recoil. Chris cautions that more research needs to be done on this, but if this is true, it's another incredible feat of evolutionary engineering. But the drama of dragonfly nymphs doesn't end with their hunting. Their very transformation into adults is one of the strangest, most grotesque, and most spectacular metamorphoses in the insect world. Most insects that we're familiar with, like butterflies, beetles, wasps, follow a 4-stage life cycle: egg, larva, pupa, and adult. Once the larva reaches full size, it becomes inactive and encloses itself in a protective case, a chrysalis or a cocoon. Inside this shelter, the insect enters the pupal stage. And here within this cocoon, a remarkable transformation unfolds. During metamorphosis, the larval tissues essentially liquefy. What's left behind are called imaginal discs, and these discs reorganize the liquefied body into the structures of the adult insect. Within this so-called pupal soup, wings, legs, eyes, and other organs are built anew. Then the adult emerges from the pupal case, expands its wings, and prepares for flight. But dragonfly larvae do this all very differently. They undergo what's called incomplete metamorphosis, though that's not a great term for it in my opinion, since their transformation is very much complete. It's just different. Dragonfly larvae do not form a pupa, nor a cocoon or a chrysalis. Instead, the metamorphosis happens entirely within the final, still active larval stage. Even as the larva hunts and avoids predators, the adult body is taking shape within. The first visual hint that this is beginning to happen is the growth of the wings. They remain tightly folded within the larval wing pads, but with each molt the pads become more prominent. By the final instar, they are swollen and conspicuous, an unmistakable indication that the larva has reached full size and is nearly ready to emerge as an adult. As the nymph prepares to transform, mouthparts also withdraw, so that feeding becomes impossible. Respiration begins to change from aquatic to aerial, and larvae spend a lot of time at the surface, even with their head or abdomen tip out of the water. Then it's time to leave the water entirely. The nymph will crawl out of the water and climb a plant stem or tree trunk. Here it will rest and dry off, and prepare to enter its adult form. What's about to happen is often called metamorphosis, but that's not the right word for it, because metamorphosis has already taken place. The proper term is eclosion, describing when an adult insect emerges from the pupa, or in this case, its larval skin. The process begins when fluids start to move around the body and the thorax begins to swell. Then a tiny point splits the larval cuticle, which opens up suddenly from the prothorax to the wing bases. The thorax continues to swell and the split extends onto the head. With more swelling and some muscular effort, the entire head and thorax then emerge from the larval's skin. Soon, the adult dragonfly pulls itself completely out of its old skin. The wings unfurl and expand greatly as body fluids are pumped into them, and eventually they move from an upright to open position, where they will stay open for the rest of their lives. The dragonfly is then ready for its maiden flight. Most dragonflies emerge at night, and then in the warm daylight sun, they take off, becoming the top aerial predatory insect the world has ever seen. Dragonfly nymphs are one of those insects that you might look at and not immediately realize just how impressive they are. You've perhaps even seen one while swimming in your local lake and thought it was just some brown bug. But that's the magic of looking more closely at the world. What seems ordinary can actually be incredible. And in this case, a brown bug can surprisingly be a biological engineering masterpiece. A dragonfly nymph's catapult jaws, mind-blowing metamorphosis, even the way their bodies move through the water using jet propulsion, are all examples of natural design that only really come alive when you understand the principles behind them. That's why I think learning the language of math and physics isn't just for classrooms. It's a way to appreciate the natural world on a deeper level. The same tools engineers use to design machines are the ones nature has been perfecting for millions of years. And if you want to start building that kind of intuition, Brilliant is the perfect place to do it. Brilliant turns abstract ideas into hands-on lessons. Building skills in calculus, for example, doesn't just give you abstract equations. It helps you appreciate just how incredible it is that the dragonfly nymph evolved its own spring-loaded catapult. With Brilliant, you can learn how the potential energy is stored as the spring is loaded, and then see how that energy is converted into kinetic energy of the jaw as it fires. You can understand the relationship between speed, velocity, and acceleration, and truly start to appreciate just how impressive these insects can be. Brilliant's updated math courses are designed to sharpen your intuition and strengthen the way you think and solve problems. You can begin at the level that's right for you and progress step by step through interactive challenges that turn abstract ideas into something tangible. Every course focuses on practical, widely applicable math concepts, so your learning always feels relevant and worthwhile. And I know that things like calculus and physics seem intimidating, but Brilliant starts you with mastering the foundations, then helps you level up to increasingly challenging problems. It's the best way that I've found to stay sharp in these subjects. It's been so long since I first learned calculus or physics in school that frankly, I've forgotten a lot of key concepts. But Brilliant helps me learn a little bit every day, and is so essential for my personal and professional growth. Brilliant keeps me on track to reaching my learning goals one day at a time. So to learn for free on Brilliant, go to brilliant.org/realscience, scan the QR code on screen, or click on the link in the description. Brilliant's also given our viewers 20% off an annual premium subscription, which gives you unlimited daily access to everything on Brilliant.